Welcome to Mysteries to Die For. I am TG Wolff, and I'm here with Jack, my piano player and producer. This is a podcast where we combine storytelling with original music to put you at the heart of a mystery. All stories are structured to challenge you to beat the detective to the solution. These are arrangements, which means instead of word-for-word readings, you get a performance that's meant to be heard. Jack and I perform these live, front to back, no breaks, no fakes, no retakes, unless the dogs decide to be really ornery. This is Season 7, Games People Play. Games are about competition, conducted according to rules with participants working toward a goal. Games are a part of every culture and are one of the oldest forms of social interaction and engagement. Games can be fun, challenging, and exhilarating, and they can also be intense, cutthroat, and lethal. This season, our authors have fashioned deadly games and unscrupulous villains to test your detective skills. This is Episode 1. The game is Faro. This is Who Killed the Faro Cheat by Larry M. Keaton.
Wait 1 second. Hold on, everybody. Okay.
He made an adjustment on the screen. I'm not sure what he did, but it looked very technical. The Gold Mining Camp, Moccasin Creek Canyon, California, July 1849. The summer sun dipped low on the western horizon when Captain Rake Caldine halted his mare. He leaned forward to relieve the lower backache and surveyed the settlement. Interspersed among the scrub oak trees, various-sized canvas tents peppered the hills. In the still, hot evening, the smell of campfires and cooking signaled the end of another day. In the creek, the sounds of diehards scooping gravel into tin pans, twirling the water so that pebbles sloshed over the sides. Just as Jason and his Argonauts searched for the golden fleece, these miners spent their daylight hours panning for gold flakes and nuggets. Their muttered curses confirmed soldiering had suited him better. He straightened to his full 6-foot height and sat tall in the saddle like a sailing ship's mast. He stroked his squarish face and pursed his lips together, knowing it projected a confidence, a no-nonsense demeanor. Eyes narrowed to hide the laugh lines. He focused his gaze straight ahead. In reality, he surveyed the 100-degree front. A practiced look, his peers chastised him for his grimness, but it had proven beneficial. One never knew who's the friend or, more importantly, the foe. As his habit, he tapped the recent model Colt Dragoon revolver in the saddle holster and his saber before kneeing his mare to move forward. From down the narrow road traipsed a stout lad, maybe 13 or 14, waving a carrot. He wore the miner's uniform, dirty checkered flannel shirt, soiled pants with its leather belt bearing a hunting knife. He swore the slouched chap barely covered a mass of curly red hair. "Mr. Soldier, you need a cot tonight?" "How much for me and my mount?" Caldine asked. Offering the animal the treat, the boy said, $3 a night, $1 for the horse, rest for bed and meals." The mare snorted and munched on the vegetable. Caldine dismounted and grabbed his saber and revolver. "I's Java," he said. "Unusual name," Caldine said. Java grinned. "Mama slapped it on me 'cause I kept sneaking coffee. I'll take you to the saloon eatin' tent. Sleep in tent and corrals out back. I'll store your gear till you're ready." He took the reins and they started toward a small meadow when 2 men burst out of the saloon. "Here we go again," Java said. "Ain't a day goes by that them 2 ain't fightin'." "Damn it, Sweeney," a lanky man shouted. "I want my gold." "He's Boots," Java said. "The stout's called Swiney. Swiney's more appropriate." Sweeney's flat face scowled at his adversary. "It's not on me." He turned and walked away. Boots reached out with his long, thin arm, grabbed Sweeney's shirt collar and tugged. Sweeney's arm flailed as he fell back. Humph! He slammed the ground, dust rising around him. Boots knelled, drawing a bowie knife. He yanked Sweeney's chin back, set the blade's edge against the man's exposed Adam's apple. "Give it up, or I'll cut your throat." Wide-eyed, Sweeney froze. Caldine sprinted toward them, drawing his saber on the run, and nudged its point into Boots' scrawny neck. "Drop it," he ordered. The man didn't move. Caldine pushed harder and pierced the skin. Blood oozed out. The moment the Bowie knife hit the dirt, Caldine withdrew. Sweeney rolled to his hands and knees and scooted away from his assailant. Caldine stepped back. "I suggest you both sober up." Boots glared at Caldine and then at Sweeney. "You've had enough time. Have my gold ready when I come calling." The Bowie in hand, he trudged away. Rising, Sweeney said, "That man's crazy." He started up the road from the meadow and the camp. Caldine slipped his saber into its sheath. Java brought up the horse. "That was fancy sword play." "Lots of practice," Caldine replied. He pulled out 2 gold coins and pushed them into the lad's hand. "This should cover a couple of days." Java extracted a 6-sided coin from his pocket. "Give this to my Aunt Erin. She's Mrs. Quinn and runs the saloon, so she knows you paid me." Caldine ran his thumb along the top, feeling tiny dimples along the edge. On its face was a heart. "What is it?" Caldine asked. "It's called a copper. Ma had it made special. Hers had one, too. And when they put it together, it meant we were one." Caldine smiled. "Just like a mother. She helps your aunt?" Java's head lowered for a moment as he inhaled a small breath. Raising it, his eyes narrowed and his jaw matched his tightened fist. "She's killed 3 months ago." Caldine kneeled to eye level with the boy. "I'm sorry to hear that. They find her killer?" Java shook his head. "Happened in San Francisco. No one cared. Someday I'll..." He gulped, pursed his lips, and then asked, "Why are you here?" Caldine rubbed a scar on his forearm, hidden underneath his blue uniform shirt. "Searching for a deserter who murdered my sergeant. Seen any soldiers pass through here lately?" "No." Java pulled the horse's reins. "Doesn't mean they haven't, though." "I could use a scout," Caldine said as he rose. "Ask around, see if anyone has spotted him. Stands 5'6", weighs about 140 pounds, missing the right part of his ear. Care to do it?" "Do I get a uniform?" Java asked. Caldine reached into his valise, tied behind his saddle. From a leather pouch, he removed a brass button and handed it to Java. "Good scouts blend in, but this signifies that you're now a dragoon. Best keep it between us." His expression serious, Java said, "I understand, sir." Caldine said, "Now then, it's time for me to soothe my parched throat." The Faro Game. From outside the saloon, the gamey smell of venison stew made Caldine's stomach growl. He entered, feeling the sight breeze slap in his face. He glanced up. Overhead, a rope and pulley system swayed large, lightweight paper fans. Behind the rough-hewn log that served as a bar, 2 men methodically tugged the ropes like ringing a church bell. 8-foot tables and benches with backs accommodated miners scraping plates and slurping down dinner. His attention was drawn to the Faro table, where a woman and man stood. He was teaching her to shuffle. Unlike San Francisco's female dealers wearing flashy apparel, she wore a simple blue calico frock, long-sleeved and high-neck collar. Besides hiding her facial features, her visor kept her black hair piled atop her head. A slender male next to her had bushy blonde mutton chops down to his lower jaw and connected by a well-trimmed mustache. A prominent gold watch chain running along his dark vest suggested he was more of a banker than a card dealer. Caldine warmed his way to the bar and ordered a whiskey and water. A barrel-chested barkeep delivered the drinks and inquired if he needed a place for the night. "Already paid Java for 2 nights, Caldine said, before downing the water. "What do he charge you?" the bartender asked. Caldine set down the glass and pulled out the copper. $6 for 2 nights for me and my horse." The barkeep shook his head. "Mrs. Quinn'll tan his hide. It's $2.50 a night." "The little schemer," Caldine thought and said, "All good. He's doing some work for me. Now, how do I get dinner?" The bartender pointed to a line of miners. Join them, grab an open seat when it's your turn. Caldine nodded to the card table. From the woman's fingers, several cards flew across the surface. She learning to shuffle? The barkeep chuckled. Like everything else in here, Mrs. Quinn is determined to keep the gold from escaping down Jamestown way. What about women? Caldine asked. She doesn't run that kind of business, he said. Caldine picked up another glass of whiskey and made his way through the crowd, keeping his saber from striking legs as he passed by. As he approached the Faro table, the mutton chop dealer said, "Here to save us from hostile Injuns?" Caldine joined 3 other men. "Seen any lately?" Mrs. Quinn lifted her face, revealing a thin nose and lips. "The ones here are a peaceful lot, so you don't have no worries. You must be weary from days traveling. Have need of a cot for the night? Meals are included." Caldine set down the copper. "Java said to give this to you." She picked it up and thumbed it before slipping it into a dress pocket. "How much did he ask?" Caldine shrugged. "A fair price." The dealer stopped shuffling. "Seeing as you're a soldier," he said in a Boston accent, "I imagine the game's familiar to you." "Poor man's roulette," Caldine said. "A suit of cards is laid out on the table. Ace is the low card, king is high. Players place their bets, and 2 cards are drawn. The first one loses, the second one wins." The dealer grinned. "Could not have said it better myself. I'm teaching Aaron the game." Caldine rubbed his forearm. "Gave up games of chance in Mexico." "I'm Frank Adams," he said, "but answer to Boston. Would you indulge this fair group by being the casekeeper?" He pointed to an abacus-type board with 13 rows and 4 bobs, matching the deck's 4 suits. As a card is played, a bob is pulled down. "Helps the punter here see what remains," he said. He leaned over to Mrs. Quinn and said, "Punters as the players, my dear." Caldine set his whiskey down and picked up the board. "Well, now we're ready," Boston said. He put the deck in a slender box. "This is the shoe. Now then, gents, place your wagers." As 3 men made their bets, a 4th, reeking of whiskey, nudged his way next to Caldine. Caldine glanced up. "Settle your differences with Boots?" Sweeney slurred in a thick southern drawl. "Good thing y'all stopped him. If you hadn't, he'd be swinging from a tree about now, feeding the crows." "And you'd be dead," thought Caldine. Sweeney placed chips on an ace and a queen. He leered at Mrs. Quinn. "Always bet on the lady." "Just like a man," Mrs. Quinn said. "Thinks the only woman in the deck will bless him with her charms." When the betting finished, Boston drew the first card. 3 of diamonds. He set it to the left of the shoe to represent the losing side. "Aaron, no wagers are paid on the first card drawn. It sets up the important last hand, in which 3 cards remain. Then these punters wager on the order the remaining cards will be revealed. Now the play begins." Boston slipped a card and revealed it. "The first loser, Queen of Hearts." Pulling Sweeney's wager toward the bank, he continued, "Apparently the lady didn't court your favor." "Just play," Sweeney snarled. "The first winner is..." Boston flipped over a deuce of diamonds. No wager rested on it. "Round's over." Mrs. Quinn pointed to the chips still on the table. "What about them?" "Punter's choice," Boston said. "Take them, leave them, or move them to other cards." The Cheater. "All right, gentlemen," Boston said, his tone cheerful. "No need to squander playing time. I shall pick up the pace. Your wagers, if you please." Other miners gathered around. A few tried their luck and retreated without their gold dust. Boston's quips about winning and losing with each round kept the game lighthearted and humorous. Meanwhile, Caldine kept his eyes peeled on where the bets were placed and Boston's dealing. Java arrived at Boston's side. Excitement filled his expression as he gave a slight nod to Caldine. Had the boy learned something? Sweeney placed 4 chips on the king and set a copper coin atop them. "A reversible wage, Mr. Sweeney," Boston said, and picked up the piece, held it high for examination. Caldine noticed the small protrusions along the upper edge. He glanced at Java, who leaned forward to see the coin. Interesting design, he said. Did you acquire it in San Francisco by chance? Sweeney reached over to grab it, but Boston set it down on the wager. Aaron, he said, by placing a copper on his chips, Mr. Sweeney is making a reversal bet. Normally, the next card is the loser card. But if it's a king, then Mr. Sweeney wins. Shall we see if the king's charity is better than his queen's? Boston tugged a card from the shoe and tapped it with his thick finger. He frowned, pulling his mutton chops closer to his lips. Are you certain you wish this particular wager? Flip it, Sweeney snarled. King of spades. Boston passed over double the wager. You should rely on men more often. When the round finished, Boston stepped aside and said, Now, Aaron, my dear, you take the deal. She protested, I'm not ready. It's like catching a lobster, Boston continued. Until you throw out the cage and bait, nothing happens. Maybe my luck will change, an older miner said as he circled his few chips over the table. Sweeney snickered, dropping coins on his selection. You divining for water or panning for gold? Shut up, Southerner, the old miner said, waiting for inspiration. He placed them on the 8, which already bore several small stacks of chips. Mrs. Quinn pulled a card and flipped it over. The loser is the 8 of spades, she said. Damn inspiration, the old miner chuckled. Failed me again. Out of the corner of his eye, Caldine saw a slight movement of Sweeney's wrist. On the board, 4 chips originally on the 8 now rested on the 6. Caldine grabbed Sweeney's forearm with his hand. Wait. Let go, Sweeney shrilled and yanked his arm. Caldine's grip tightened. Sweeney twisted his torso to break free, but Caldine squeezed harder. Sweeney swung his bald fist at Caldine's face. Caldine jumped up, now a head taller than his assailant. The blow glanced off his shoulder. A click broke the silence over the faro table. Enough, you cheat, Boston said, lest you wish another hole in your head. Out of the periphery of his eye, Caldine noticed a long knife and 2 barrels alongside, pointed at them. His heart skipped a beat. Releasing, Captain, Boston ordered. Using the blade's sharp tip, he flipped up the chips, revealing a thin horsehair attached to the bottom disc. My trigger finger dislikes scoundrels. Best you depart now before my trigger finger slips. He paused. And I'll have that copper. Sweeney glared at him, threw the medallion on the table, and then stormed away. Mr. Sweeney, Mrs. Quinn said. He turned and glared. What? You're no longer welcome here. Sweeney laughed. Your whiskey's not fit for a dog. He turned on his heels and stormed out the tent. Caldine watched Boots slide out after him. Mrs. Quinn said, Impressive, Captain. Them keen reflexes. Caldine smiled. A professional necessity in order to survive. Now then, my punters, Boston said, I believe we need a drink before we restart. He turned to Java and pressed something into his hand. Be a good lad and bring us a bottle and glasses. The boy nodded and went to the bar. Aaron, he continued, besides a sharp eye, you must have a quick memory of placed wagers. Sweeney's trick is a common one. In the heat of betting, it can move like a slippery snake. There are other methods, too, which I'll share later as to not give these lads ideas. He began to return his weapon to its sheath. Never saw one of those, Caldine said. Boston handed it over. Postal pistol, it's called. Won it from a Norwegian in a poker game. Has 2 barrels and a 14-inch blade. It's quite effective. Been told it's necessary for hunting boar. And I've used it to stop cheats and thieves. Caldine hefted the postal pistol in his hand. He pulled the hammers and revealed post for percussion caps, which started the firing process. No caps, he asked. The dealer smiled. No need to shoot my toe unwittingly. He turned serious. But mind you, when the need arises, they're in place. Stomach growling, Caldine excused himself for dinner. He stood 4th in line when Java tugged on his uniform shirt. This way. He led Caldine to a small table in the kitchen. We can talk here. Plates of steamy stew and biscuits set before them. Java reported that a soldier matching Caldine's description had passed through 2 days earlier. Heard he's headed to join some Mexican greasers in Sonora. It's a half-day ride from here. Well done, Scout. I'll head out in the morning. Caldine took a bite into the biscuit. His taste buds came alive, savoring the velvety texture and the hot butter and honey. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. My God, Java chuckled. Miners pay an ounce of dust for a plate of these. Lynch him. Lynch him! Lynch him! The shout sprung Caldine from his cot. As for battle, he donned his trousers and boots and grabbed his revolver before bolting out to the cool dawn. He followed the chance to the creek's bank across from the saloon.
Lucy!
And we've just had a dog interruption. A very unhappy dog. A dog who doesn't think she should be locked up, but should be allowed to run free. We shall test that approach. We'll begin that chapter again. Lynch him. Lynch him. Lynch him. The shout sprung Caldine from his cot. As for battle, he donned his trousers and boots and grabbed his revolver before bolting out into the cool dawn. He followed the chance to the creek's bank across from the saloon. Beneath a large oak tree, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a deeply tanned face and wearing a buckskin jacket held a hangman's rope. A bulky black man bucked and twisted, anything to keep his neck away from the noose. A second Negro, thin with hands tied behind his back, stood to one side, watching. Two miners managed to manhandle the larger colored upright while the hangman slipped on the noose, then threw the rope's loose ends over the small limb 8 feet above the ground. Caldine raced toward the crowd that formed a semicircle in front of the tree. The rope yanked tight, the whites in the man's eyes went wide, and a gasp escaped his thick lips. The limb creaked as his legs flailed in the air. The thinner man started forward, but his guard knocked him to the dirt. Crack! A rifle shot pierced the morning dawn. The miners ducked. Caldine searched for the firer as the scent of black powder rose in his air. "We'll have no English tyranny here," Mrs. Quinn shouted as she appeared, dressed in miner's garb, her hair tucked beneath a slouch hat. Caldine reached the front. Snap! Dust rose high when the larger man slammed down hard, followed by the tree limb. Several Argonauts rushed forward. Caldine fired his revolver. "Back off," he said. No one moved. "Are you all deaf?" Miss Quinn asked, her tone reinforced by her musket now aimed at the miners. "Or you want more encouragement?" "Damn it all to hell, Mrs. Quinn," snapped the hangman. "This is man's business." "Well, Mr. White, this musket makes it mine. I won't let Java witnessing you murdering these two." "They murdered Sweeney," Wyeth said. "Hanging is called for. Law says so." "Law says they get a trial," she snapped back. "Ain't entitled," a squeaky voice from the crowd shouted. "They're coloreds." Caldine stepped up to the two doomed men. The larger one lay slumped on the ground. His eyes and expression were empty. The rail-thin man stood frozen, his nostrils flaring with each breath. Caldine waved his revolver at the closest. "Move away." A miner reached for his pistol. "Hell if I will." "Mister," Caldine said as he thumbed back the revolver's hammer, 5 bullets remain. The next one sends you to meet your maker." Wyeth said, "We ain't spilling more blood today. Join the others." Seeing Boston in the crowd, Caldine shouted, "Mr. Adams, have you your postal pistol on you?" The dealer moved forward and tapped the long sheath. "Naturally." "Would you cut these men's ropes and stand by them?" Caldine asked. Boston withdrew his blade and held it up for all to see. Reaching the pair, he said, "Don't want any trouble." The thin man pulled away. "Steady, boy. I've no quarrels with you, only removing these bindings." Finished, he moved to the man on the ground. Caldine faced Wyeth, still holding the revolver. The man stood tall and had 30 pounds bulk weight on him. What happened? Who the hell are you? Wise said, his tone scolding. Captain Ray Caldine, 1st Dragoons, U.S. Army, representative of California's military governor, General Bennett C. Riley. And you? This ain't no soldiering concern, he nodded to the coloreds. These two knifed Sweeney in the gut. 2 witnesses seen him. Mrs. Quinn joined Caldine at his side. How do you know? The big one was standing over the body, Wise said. Caldine stepped closer, locked his gaze on him. You the civil authority here? Mrs. Quinn said. He likes to think so, but we've elected no one. Wyeth puffed out his chest and pointed at the crowd. We all decided. Caldine drew himself taller. In a flat, even tone, he said, California's under martial law. Since there's no recognized civil authority, this becomes an army matter. Wyeth gripped the handle of his Bowie knife. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared like a charging bull. Caldine stepped closer and locked his gaze on Wyeth's, his pistol aimed at the man's stomach. Wyeth broke contact and glared at Mrs. Quinn. This is your doing. We'll hold the damn trial to suit you. I'll be the judge. Caldine stared down the road at the camp. He didn't need to be here. Finding a man who murdered a sergeant, that was his duty. Let the miners handle this. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat, flowed through his head. Not now, drum sergeant. He glanced at the 2 men accused sitting on the ground. Their faces showed no fear, just resignation at the inevitable. A look he'd seen too many times in the past. Not quite. Wyeth dug in. Miners' law says we elect right now, Caldine said. Army law rules. Wyeth opened his mouth to protest. Instead, he turned to the others. Get back to your diggings. They didn't move. You heard the man, Caldine said. Anyone who doesn't leave now, Mrs. Quinn said, is barred from the saloon. Well, most of the crowd walked away then. A few stayed back, watching. Wyeth started to leave. Hold on, Mr. Wyeth, Caldine said. Where's the body? Wyeth pointed to a wagon. Figured he ought to seen his killers hung before we buried him. Caldine holstered his pistol. These witnesses, where are they? Wyeth shrugged. Not my problem, Captain. He stomped off toward the camp. Caldine nodded to the Negroes. Who are they? Mrs. Quinn lowered her rifle. The big fellow is Samson, and the thin one is Ezekiel. They're Sweeney's slaves brought out here to work the claim. Slavery is illegal in California, Caldine said. And who's enforcing the law? Mrs. Quinn shot back over her shoulder as she approached the 2. She placed her hand on Samson's neck. I got some salve that'll help. To Boston, she continued, you can stay in my storage tent behind the saloon. Then she turned to Caldine. That is, if you approve, Captain. Her suggestion made sense. The woman may not know how to shuffle cards, Caldine thought, but she knows how to take command of a situation. Definitely not one to cross. Any idea who these witnesses might be? Probably the Brown brothers, she said. They be bad blood between them. Their claims sit next to each other. Mrs. Quinn and the 2 rescued prisoners, heads bent low, trudged toward their makeshift jail. Caldine and Boston went to the wagon. Sweeney's body had been tossed inside. His contorted face suggested surprise. Caldine unbuttoned the man's reddish-stained shirt. The bile, putrid smell mingled with the coppery scent of blood. Whoever did this used a Bowie knife. The decision to investigate. Caldine sipped the hot coffee, figuring General Riley would take a dim view of his decision, probably call him negligent. Maybe he was, but something about the Negro matter nagged at his gut. Captain, Mrs. Quinn said, putting down a plate of ham and potatoes and biscuits with honey before Caldine. An imposition, if I may? Please. He started to rise, but she waved him down. A gentleman, she said, her thin lips smiling. Something quite rare here. Must be the prospecting that takes it out of him. She sat down and passed over a small bag. I'm returning $3 of your gold dust as you aren't staying the night. Java says your horse will be ready by the time you finish. After slathering down honey on biscuits, he bit into the soft, warm crust. Mm-hmm. Setting it down, he swallowed and said, I'm not sure I wish to give these up. Can't understand men raving over my biscuits, she said. They're nothing more than flour, milk, and eggs. Compared to hardtack and jerky, this is pure ambrosia, ma'am. He popped the last morsel into his mouth. Her green eyes took on a serious look beneath the frown. You did a fine and courageous and Christian thing halting the hanging. I fear the longer Samson and Ezekiel be here, somebody will rile up the miners to finish what they started. Caldine leaned back into the bench's backboard and crossed his arms. Like Wyeth? She twirled the gold wedding ring on her ring finger. Sweeney is not a well-liked. Mr. Wyeth owns a freight company, and he wants to put a bridge on the man's claim for a new road he's building. With your departing this morning, and you being the proper authority, no one would question you taking Ezekiel and Samson. She paused. I mean, to stand trial in Monterey or plain let him go. I'll even send a plate of biscuits along. Caldine sliced a sliver of ham, chewed on it, and pondered her suggestion. It was a simple solution. Get back on the trail to find Corporal Reynolds, a deserter with Sergeant's blood on his hands. But they'd slow him down. Letting them go? Well, he sighed. What about the other miners? A shake of her head. Why lose panning time to chase down them two devils? He swallowed the meat. You make good sense. She rose, her thin lips in a tight smile. A woman normally does. Breakfast finished, Caldine went to the storage tent. They give you any trouble? A gray-haired man with a full beard sat on a stump smoking a scrimshaw pipe. He tipped the pipe's long stem toward the tent. Imagine them tuckered out, the old man said. They helped me give that southerner a earth bath up yonder. We should have let the coyotes feast on him. The man wasn't well liked, Caldine said. Most here don't cotton to having slaves. He took a puff on his pipe, exhaled a stream of smoke. Strange thing, his mouth was stuffed with the Queen of Hearts. Sweeney's comment from the previous evening came popping up into Caldine's mind. Did Samson and Ezekiel know the man's habit of betting on the Queen? Or did it have another meaning for them? Inside the tent, Caldine found the two sitting on crates. A water bucket sat to one side, as did their breakfast plates. A couple of questions? Samson rubbed his forefingers along the reddish rope berg on his mulatto skin. Ain't nothing to say. Is he trying to get them both killed? Is that true, Ezekiel? Ezekiel shut his eyes. The crate creaked as Samson shifted his bulk. Master's dad had his tongue cut out. Heat flared in Caldine's neck. Bastard. Mrs. Quinn says I should take you this morning. Head bent, Samson sighed and clasped his hands together. Don't man or do it. Being hung here, being hung there, all's the same. We's dead. Why prolong it? Caldine pushed his grip into his saber tight. He felt the pommel dig deep into his palm. Holy Mother of Jesus, Samson. Is there not one iota of resistance or defiance in that big bulk of yours? Samson shifted his gaze upward. Captain, we just chattel. Why do you care? The question slammed him like a bullet. It wasn't his abolitionist father's rants taking hold, nor was it his Christian beliefs, but something deeper. The light rat-a-tat-tat of a drummer beat rose from his subconsciousness. A drumbeat played by a black drummer in the Seminole War, whose stalwart stance and steady rhythm stymied a disorderly retreat and spurred the army unit to defeat over an overwhelming enemy. It's my duty, Samson, to prevent mob violence and abuse of power. You can be the victim and give up, or tell me who killed Sweeney. Your choice. Samson stood and joined Ezekiel. If we was to kill Master, we'd have done it crossing the isthmus. Swamp eats people right well, and we didn't do it last night. Who wanted him dead? Caldine asked. Ezekiel pointed to the tent opening and grunted. Samson chortled. He says, who didn't? Does it include this man Boots, who claims Sweetie owed him gold? A snarl crossed Samson's face. Good-for-nothing rowdy cracker. He and Master were arguing when we left the claim. Something about San Francisco. Caldine rested his left hand atop his saber's pommel. When was that? Samson rubbed his chin and frowned. Ezekiel thumped his chest 3 times. He says 3 months. With that, Caldine stepped out of the tent and found Java talking to the guard. Tired, Scout? Java stifled a yawn. Boston's snoring. Ani says you're heading out. I am, Caldine said. But first I'd like to see Sweeney's digging. You have a mount? A mule, Java said. Then lead on, Caldine ordered. The Brown Twins. Reaching Sweeney's claim, Java asked, "What you expect to find?" Caldine dismounted. "I want to talk to these witnesses." Java chortled as he did the same. Brown brothers, they're twins. One wears thick glasses as a whiskey bottle, and the other's nearly as bad. Doubt they'll have anything useful. Caldine studied the camp as he tied his mare to a tree. Then they spurred a lynch mob. The claim sat on a 5-foot bank above the stream, which was hidden by scrub brush. An irregularly shaped lone tent lay in a canvas heap, and clothes and leather satchel were strewn outside. Caldine went to the tent, lifted the flap, upturned the cot, and saw an upturned cot with blankets and was otherwise barren. Java checked the coffee pot laying in the fire pit. "Empty," he said. "So is the satchel." As they passed through the opening, the pungent smell of musky oak lingered along the path. Gravel crunched under Caldine's boots when he stepped onto the creek bed. Downstream, 2 men were panning gold. Java identified them as the Browns. Caldine trudged toward them. The closer Brown straightened his gaunt frame, still sloshing water and pebbles out of his pan. "We heard you'd be coming." Caldine noted the hostility in the tone. Further down, the second Brown stretched his back and then quick-footed this way, splashing water with each step. Reaching them, he pushed out his wet hand. "Theodore Brown, I apologize for William's uncivil manner." "Uncivil hell," William shot back. "Just saying I know who he was." Caldine shook both men's hands. "Understand you saw Samson kill Sweeney." Theodore cocked his head. "No, I specifically said Samson was standing over Sweeney's body, and that was at first light." "If you ask me," William said, "Samson did us a favor." Caldine eyed him. "You didn't like the man?" Theodore agreed. "A den of rattlers would have been preferable neighbors. Plus," William said, "he was stealing our gold." "And he treated them colored something terrible," Theodore said. Java chimed in. "I heard he used a horsewhip on Ezekiel." The twins' head bobbed in agreement. "Unless Samson was around," William added. In the brief time he'd known Sweeney, Caldine assessed the man as a scoundrel. "Did you hear anything?" he asked. "I was a wind-sailed whipped," William said. "Slept like a hibernating bear." "I heard a scuffle," Theodore added. Then Sweeney shouted, "Don't be a fool, boy. You'll hang for sure." Caldine frowned. "Any idea who this boy is?" William said, "It's the only name he used with Ezekiel and Samson. Figured he was talking to them." "Thanks for your time," Caldine said. He tapped Java on the shoulder. It was time to depart. Out of earshot, he said, "Well, Scout, any thoughts?" Java scratched his head and looked around. "If that's Sweeney's tent, where do Samson and Ezekiel sleep?" "Good observation," Caldine said. "Samson said he and Ezekiel were coming here from up the creek when they found the body. Is it possible they were working on another claim upstream?" Java shrugged. "More likely living with the Injun tribe over yonder." Seeing the crushed brown grass with a sizable dried blood stain, Caldine went over and knelt by it. He waved Java over. "Want to show you something." Java hesitated and then finally squatted. "Sweeney died here." Caldine surveyed the ground and then stood. "Over there is a blood trail." They followed it for 20 feet and Caldine stopped. "Sweeney got the blade here." Beneath several trampled blades of grass, he spotted a small, round ball. He picked it up and examined it. He glanced over at Java, pale face. "You all right?" For several long moments, Java stared at the ground, turned, and then bolted for a nearby bush. Death in the storage tent. Back at the corral, Caldine spied Mrs. Quinn hunched over an older guard, a bloody dried cloth pressed to his stomach. Caldine jumped off his horse and dashed to her side. Mrs. Gwynn glared at him, anger in her eyes and face. "You could have stopped this." Years of combat immuned him to the sight of blood, but not the stench of death. The bitterness in her rebuke struck him like a saber slash. "How is this my fault?" She sent Java to fetch the doctor. Caldine sighed. "What happened?" "Are you blind, Captain?" She nodded to the tent. "Ezekiel's dead, too." The overwhelming smell of copper struck him as he entered the tent. Ezekiel lay crumbled on the floor, his eyes wide open, his shirt matted with red on his stomach. Samson sat on his haunches, rocking back and forth, mumbling incomprehensible words, cut to his arms. "Samson?" Caldine said. Samson's tear-streaked face tilted up. He killed Ezekiel. I killed him." On top of an overturned crate lay a second body, the head twisted at an odd angle, a bloodied bowie knife clutched in his hands. It was Boots. Mrs. Quinn came in with a cloth and a bucket of water. "Samson, let me see your arm." Samson stood and backed away. He's coming in all cornered up, wild-eyed and demanding gold." To Mrs. Quinn he said, "How is—" He nodded to the tent opening. "Working on his wound," she said. "I pray heaven stocks his tobacco." Boston Adams slipped through the flap. "By the saints, what happened?" "Boston," Mrs. Quinn said. "There's a roll of canvas in the corner to cover the bodies." Caldine knelt to examine Ezekiel's stomach wound. Then he stepped over to Boots and removed the bowie knife from his hand. Behind them, he listened to Mrs. Quinn directing the actions like an experienced mortician. Java arrived with the doctor. Without his satchel, the man would be indistinguishable from the other miners. He made a cursory check of the bodies, pronounced them dead, and then checked on Samson's wounds. Mrs. Quinn stood, hands on her hips. Before she could unleash more wrath on him, Caldine escaped outside. A pit formed in his stomach. His decision led to more killing, unnecessary killing. Fighting wars, not playing sheriff, was what he was good at. The doctor joined him. "Damn heat," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Too bad his wounds are superficial. If he died, this whole matter would be settled." "You think he's guilty?" Caldine asked. "Makes no difference," the man said. "He's a colored believed guilty of killing his white master. I imagine someone's going to want to make an example of him if he remains." With that, he strolled away. Caldine sighed. She's even got the doctor telling him to move on. Mrs. Quinn joined him outside, anguish in her face. "You must take Samson with you." She paused. "I beseech you, or his blood will rest heavy on your soul." Caldine remained quiet. Her shoulders slumped and she trudged away. The rat-a-tat-tat began in his head. "Damn it," droned Sergeant. "I know my duty." He studied the bowie knife and returned to the tent. Boston, Java, and Samson were finishing with Boots's corpse. "Does he have a pistol?" They pulled back the canvas. No holster, no pistol. "Boston, would you take Samson into the saloon?" Caldine said. "Have Mrs. Quinn there, too. And Java, see if you can fetch Mr. Wythe. I figured out what happened." "All right, Jack, we're at the deliberation."
All right.
So Jack's at a little disadvantage today because he's playing his acoustic piano.
Yeah, it's a bit loud.
It's a bit loud, so I'm going to do a recap for you.
Okay.
Okay.
I've been paying as much attention. I've been paying attention. I've been hearing as much as possible.
Okay. So our detective hero is Captain Ray Caldine with the California Army.
Got it.
So he arrives at this gold mining camp.
Yes.
And a fight breaks out between our now dead body Sweeney and Boots. Boots is accusing him of not paying back gold that he borrowed, and Boots has a bowie knife.
Boots has a bowie knife.
Okay. Caldine goes into the mess tent, and while he's not playing Faro, but he's overseeing it, Sweeney attempts to cheat.
With a horsehair.
He has a horsehair attached to the bottom of his coin, and when his card came up a loser, he moved it, and Caldine caught him. So he gets run out of the tent by Boston using his postal pistol, which has a 14-inch blade and then 2 barrels.
Okay.
Before he did that, he played a copper, which is a coin that reverses the bet. And that coin suspiciously looked like a match to the one that Java had, that his mom had given him,
Mm-hmm.
and that she had the other one. Now, she was killed 3 months ago in San Francisco.
Wow. This is a lot.
Yep.
Complicated stuff.
Yep. So now Sweeney's dead,
Sweeney's dead.
and the Brown brothers saw Samson standing over his body,
Uh-huh.
and their testimony is that they heard him shouting at somebody the night before, and using the word boy.
Yes.
So they assumed that he was yelling at Samson or Ezekiel, but they said they did not see him kill him. They just saw him standing over it.
Okay.
And then I think it was the Browns also testified that he heard Boots and Sweeney Boots and Sweeney arguing over something that happened in San Francisco.
Okay. San Francisco seems to be the place not to be.
Okay, so now with that really quick synopsis,
Uh-huh.
Captain Ray Caldine doesn't want to play sheriff, but he's the only one who can do the job of solving Sweeney's murder, with our help, of course. So here's a list of the camp folks who aren't dead, and the order that Caldine met them.
Got it.
So we have Java, the nephew of the saloon owner whose mother was killed in San Francisco.
Uh-huh.
We have Boston, Boots wasn't deceased at the time that Sweeney died, so he's on the list. So we have Boots, who's now deceased,
Okay.
the miner who Sweeney owed money.
Uh-huh.
We have Boston, the Faro dealer who shares a tent with Java.
Okay.
Mrs. Aaron Quinn, the owner of the saloon and aunt to Java.
Okay.
Mr. Wythe, the businessman who is trying to appoint himself leader of the camp.
Okay.
We have Samson and Ezekiel, Sweeney's abused slaves.
Uh-huh.
And we have the Brown brothers, miners with the claim next to Sweeney.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the facts that Caldine has to work with. I just told you some of them, but I'm going to read them the way I have them written.
Got it.
So Boots fought with Sweeney over debt and threatened to stab him if he didn't pay up.
Uh-huh.
Boston caught Sweeney cheating at Faro and chased him out at knife point. Mrs. Quinn banned him from the saloon.
Okay.
The copper Sweeney gambled with was the missing half of the one that Java had. It was last seen with his mother before she was killed.
Interesting.
Mr. Wyeth reportedly battled with Sweeney over land. Sweeney's claim was blocking the road Wyeth wants to build.
All right.
Samson and Ezekiel were brought in to work the claim, though slavery is illegal in California.
Oh.
The Brown brothers didn't like their neighbor, Sweeney, saying that he stole from them.
Guy does
So
not sound like a
Sweeney
good
was
dude.
killed sometime during the night.
Okay.
We already said that Theodore Brown heard Sweeney argue with someone who referred to as boy, and then Theodore saw Samson standing over Sweeney's body the next morning.
I see. All right. Here's my dissertation from what this is. Congrats to the author, man. He confused the hell out of me. All right. Truthfully, no fucking clue. However, I will give you an answer. So you have Java. Java Mama is dead.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and I think all my audience members would agree with me, Sweeney killed Java Mama and stole the Kappa. So that gives Java that extra motive to want to kill Sweeney.
Totally agree.
But you phrased something. I'm going to game this hard. You phrased it that you included Boots as a suspect. And sometimes you like to include that just to throw me off because you know I game these.
It was just the way I wrote them because I wrote Boots deceased, and I'm like, why did I put a deceased person on there? And then I was like, oh, right, he wasn't deceased at the time Sweeney died. So technically, if we're talking about Sweeney's murder, he is a suspect.
Because there's 2 murders.
Well, but they know the second one was Ezekiel and Boots, but we know who killed them because Boots killed Ezekiel and then Samson killed Boots. I'm not sure who killed the guy outside. I think Boots did.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's a bloody little...
Yeah, it is.
It's a bloody little mining camp.
So I suspect Java did it.
Okay.
And that debacle was separate.
Okay.
Of course, it's probably not the case because these authors oftentimes don't do that. they like to be like, ooh, actually, you think these two are separate? They're actually the same thing. That's right, because he's that guy's secret father, you know?
Jack is talking with his hands, showing how the story comes back together.
Exactly. So, I personally believe Java killed Sweeney, and then those other guys lost their minds and killed each other.
All right. So when it comes to all right, punters, whose head do you put your gold dust on? You're putting it on Java's head.
I am. However, you also have to keep in mind that he said boy, so I highly doubt his killer is the one not boy person that you said. There was one suspect.
Mrs.
Lady.
Quinn?
Yes. I doubt it's Mrs. Quinn. Also, I don't think she has that much to gain from killing him. You know, she doesn't want him in her. Wait, was she the owner of the?
She's the owner of the saloon.
So there's no reason for her to want him dead, just for her to want him out of that saloon. Wow, there are a lot of suspects. There's the business owner.
Mm-hmm.
No clue why he would have done it. So
he wanted to build a bridge, and the bridge would have gone over Sweeney's land, so he wanted Sweeney's land.
Well, that's a little overkill to kill him for it, in my opinion. But people have done stupider things on Scooby-Doo, so I'm going to say he didn't do it. It's just going to be a happy little accident for him. I don't think the two abused slaves did it, because even though they have a lot of motive, there's just too much motive, you know? You know, they wouldn't make him do it. No. I
think like Samson said, if they would have done it, they would have done it in a different way, and the body would be gone.
Yeah, we can say that, but you never know. Why am I disagreeing with you? Yes, you say that, no, they didn't do it that way. So that means you're right. The slaves didn't do it. Thank you. All right, let's go to the Boots brothers. I don't remember enough about them.
The Brown brothers? They're the twins who are basically blind.
The blind twins. I don't think they would have done it. Of course, it would make sense if they're basically blind that they couldn't, like, hide the body or anything. Where would they hide it? They can't see. And then there's Boots. I don't think Boots did it. I get the motive that he had. I just personally believe he didn't do it.
You know, it dawned on me that if he would have done it, he wouldn't have gone into the tent trying to get money from the two slaves, right? He would have taken it off of...
Yeah. How did the slaves have money?
Well, I guess if he was supposing if they killed him, they would have robbed him, right?
Maybe
I don't know.
He did rob them.
Because he went into the tent.
Oh, wait, you're
Samson said he came into the tent crazy-eyed and looking for gold.
Looking for gold. Man, them California gold miners, they went nuts.
You would think that if he killed... why else would he think that Samson and Ezekiel have the gold?
That's a good point. So maybe Boots knows more than we think he knows, or doesn't know less than we... What? That sentence didn't make sense. My point is my money's on the coffee. Java.
All right.
Java the Hutt.
So let's find out who killed the Faro cheat. Inside the saloon, without the swaying fans, the air hung like a winter's quilt. Mrs. Quinn and Boston Adams were seated on one side of the dining table, Samson on the other. A bottle of whiskey and 4 glasses sat between them. Caldine stood at the head of the table, towering over the others. He placed Boots' bloodied bowie knife down. Java entered the tent. Mr. Watts headed for Jamestown. I know which town he's going to. Jamestown. Caldine nodded and pointed to the spot next to Samson. Scout, take a seat. This is no place, Mrs. Quinn started. Time he grows up, Caldine said. Java hesitated, looked to his aunt. She dipped her head and several strands of black hair fallen from her bun. She slid onto the bench. One of you killed Sweeney, Caldine said. Why would we do that? Adams shot back, hostility in his voice. Java, Caldine said. May I see the copper your mother gave you? The lad paled, his eyes showing terror. You're scaring the boy, Mrs. Quinn said. He doesn't need to hear this. Caldine extended his hand, palm up, flat. Scouts are expected to obey requests. The copper. Java slipped the coin into Caldine's hand. This, Mr. Adams, is the reason one of you would kill Sweeney. He pulled it apart, holding up the one half with little holes around the edges. He said, "This is the one Java had." Lifting the other with the tiny pins, he continued, "This is the one that Sweeney played that night he died." Caldine put the pieces together and handed it to Java. "This pretty much implicates Sweeney as Java's mother's killer." Boston Adams poured a whiskey into a glass and slugged it back. A scowl masked his face. "All right, I did it. What now?" "Boston," Mrs. Quinn protested. "Mr. Adams," Caldine said, "at first I figured you the culprit, as your postal knife pistol is what killed Sweeney." He removed the round ball from his pocket and placed it on the table. "I found this at the claim." He slipped it into the barrel and used the rod to push it down. "Fits perfectly. Plus, you said that when you needed to use it, you'd insert a percussion cap." He pulled back the knife's crossbar, which exposed the hammer and pin. "Nothing." "That eliminated you," Caldine said. "Earlier today, Java and I met the Brown brothers. Theodore reported that Sweeney called his murderer boy. Immediately, everyone assumed it was Sampson. Southerners are prone to use the term for their male property, but he didn't have access to the postal pistol, which left me with Java." Caldine's gaze focused on Java. The boy stiffened, head bent low, pulling at his index finger, his cheeks flushed bright red. "When we first met," Caldine said, "he vowed to see his mother's killer dead. And given he shares a tent with Mr. Adams, he could have taken the pistol, slipped out and killed Sweeney. Except, how do you explain the queen stuffed into the man's mouth? Like Sampson, Java knew nothing about Sweeney's queen remark during the Faro game." He turned to Mrs. Quinn. "That morning, you wore miner's clothes, and to a drunk Sweeney, you probably pass as a boy. Retrieving the knife pistol wouldn't have been difficult. Given Sweeney's comment about betting on the queen, suffering the Queen of Hearts into his mouth was pure justice." She raised her chin, her eyes cold, and bared her teeth. "I couldn't stand the man," her tone hard and words precise. "He murdered my sister in cold blood and left her ravaged body lying in an alley with rats, and no one cared." She paused. She took a deep breath. "I don't regret what I did." She stood and faced Java. "You've seen your mother's killer dead." Facing Caldine, she continued, "I'll get my things." Java leaped up and ran to her, grabbed her around the waist. "Please, Captain." Boston rose, as did Sampson. "I killed him," Sampson said. "Java's lost one. It was my postal pistol," Boston insisted. "I'll take the blame." A heaviness weighed on Caldine's shoulder. His mouth dry, he tried to swallow, but his tightened throat refused. He reached for the whiskey bottle and poured himself a drink, cognizant all eyes were on him. Was this his duty? Break up a family because they took the law into their own hands when the law refused to help? He drank the whiskey, letting the alcohol burn through the barrier in his throat. "Everyone, sit down," he said. "My report to General Riley will state Sweeney killed your sister, Mrs. Quinn. His assailant was Boots after they got into a fight over the gold. As such, this matter is closed. I'm sure you will keep this discussion among us. I'm also preparing a document declaring Sansom a free man under the authority of the military governor, effective immediately. Slavery is illegal in this territory. If you'll excuse me, I will write the 2 reports and then be on my way." Half an hour later, papers complete and delivered, Caldine mounted his mare. His quarry was a half-day's ride ahead. Java exploded from the saloon tent. "Wait!" he shouted, reaching Caldine. He pulled the scout button from his pocket and extended it in a flat of his palm. "I'll guess you want this?" Caldine dismounted, knelt down to eye level to the boy. He placed his hand on his shoulder. "I've already informed General Riley that I have a scout in the camp watching for deserters. You hold on to it, and I have one more mission for you." "What's that?" the boy asked. "Convince Boston Adams to run the Faro table. If it ever gets out how your aunt deals with cheats, well," he paused and smiled, "plus, her baking is significantly better than her shuffling." The end.
You know what? Screw that author. He threw me off. That was a stupid... Who wrote this? Really? She dressed like a boy?
Well, she just dressed like a minor, but being a woman, she would have faded in. I mean, breasts disappear between, behind bulky, whatever they were wearing, plaid shirts.
How bulky was it? It was like...
The guy was drunk, too.
That's some bull crap.
You're just mad because you got it wrong.
He made me feel
you
like
got
I
it
was
half
right,
right.
for so long.
You got it half right because you said that Sweeney was Java's mama's killer.
Yes, I didn't... Okay.
It was killing me when you're like, she has no motive. And I'm like, but she's Java's aunt, which means...
I forgot that. I heard it once at the beginning, and then the piano was loud. Okay? That's my excuse.
I was dying over here because I wanted to say it. I'm like, no, because he'll game that. I can't say anything. You would jump all over me.
To be honest with you, I thought you were weirdly quiet during that part. I was watching you, and you were like avoiding eye contact.
Damn
and
it.
I was like,
I have to work on my gamesmanship.
Yeah, apparently. You got to wear like sunglasses and a hat. Poker face.
So you can't see.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so if you think about it backwards, so Mrs. Quinn, Erin, she dressed as a minor just in regular clothes. She went into the tent that Java and Boston shared, took Boston's pistol, and then went and killed Sweeney, letting him just drop where he was. And she went back, put the knife back, and that's when the whole thing started with him being discovered.
Yeah. These dogs are going to be the death of me. We'll be right back. Yeah, screw this author. He did that just to screw with me, okay? He was like, that detail could have been left out and no one would have noticed.
Well, on the flip side, if you had been a very attentive listener, you would have caught.
That was a red herring. He put it in to throw me off, okay?
You know what? When I first read it, I thought Java did it too. And I'm like, please don't let it be Java. Please, that just seems bad.
But it was also had that Murder on the Orient Express ending. Just we gotta let it be because this isn't like...
What do you think about that? Do you like that?
I liked it because even then I was just like, oh, yeah, that's a terrible ending. We do have some authors who would just like let her go to prison and like hang her in front of Java. And so I was praying that this guy was nicer than them.
I also thought it was pretty cool that seeing what was coming, that both Boston and Samson were willing to take the heat for it. And especially with Samson, like... That would have been the end of him. I don't know what had happened to Boston if he just... I guess I don't know my 1849 California
Both of them would
law.
have just been killed at that point. It seems like death was a very easy solution back then.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I'm going to start playing that outro music.
Wait, do you want to hear about Faro?
I would love to. I'd also like to hear about our author. Because, quite frankly, you say their name once at the beginning, and then I have to remember it so that I can yell at them when they do something that annoys me, but I forget it.
All right, so Faro is not a poker game, but it's a card game all its own. And Larry did a really nice job in his story teaching us how it's played. According to Wikipedia, Faro originated in France with the earliest references found in the late 1690s to 1700s. It seems that the word came from the court of Louis XIV, who picked the name from the image of a pharaoh on the French-made cards. The spelling changed, but the pronunciation stayed the same. Faro spread throughout Europe and eventually into the U.S., and it was very popular in the 1800s and could be found in nearly every gambling hall. An 1882 study cited Faro as the most popular form of gambling based on the amount of money bet each year. While Faro was wildly popular, it was wildly common to cheat. The house cheated too. Played straight, the odds only slightly favored the house and the payouts were good. Hoyle's Rules of Game, which is a bible of various card games and rules, reportedly began their Faro section by warning readers that there wasn't an honest game in the U.S. Doctored shoots, the sleight of hands, they all worked to increase the house's edge on the odds. And the Wikipedia posting had references to criminal prosecutions in 1803 and 1835. But players cheated too, just like in today's story. Moving bets by sleight of hand or using a thread and moving coppers were common cheats, and not surprisingly, they caused more than a few brawls. I'm sure that today's body, Sweeney, would have preferred a good butt kicking to what he got. So the link to the Wikipedia post is in the show notes. So it is my pleasure to introduce a new author to both to us and to the writing world, Larry M. Keaton. So Larry is a 43-year Army career in county government service. He has plenty of unique characters to choose from for his short stories. His 51-year marriage to his high school sweetheart has proved him ample lessons of dialogue best never said. His first published story, Some Treats Are Nasty Tricks, appeared in the September 2023 issue of Mystery Magazine. Then he wrote a nice note that to be accepted and then chosen to lead off Season 7 of Mysteries to Die For is a tremendous honor. I really liked his story. I thought it was crafted really well, and yes, he did it well enough that you could have believed anybody did it.
Correct.
So the wrap-up. This wraps up this episode of Mysteries to Die For. Support our show by subscribing, telling a mystery lover about us, and giving us a 5-star review. Check out our website, tgwolff.com/podcast, for the links to the season's authors. Mysteries to Die For is hosted by TG Wolff and Jack Wolff. Who Killed the Faro Cheat was written by Larry M. Keaton. Music and production are by Jack Wolff. Episode art is by TG Wolff. Join us next week for a toe tag, which is a first chapter and a fresh release in the mystery, crime, or thriller genre. Then come back in 2 weeks for our next original story, A Scent of Murder, The Cow Flap Bingo Caper by Paul A. Barra, where, well, Cow Flap Bingo is the featured game. All right, Jack, take us out.